Hi everybody, this is Austin from Craft Crickets in Eugene, Oregon. Welcome back to our video series, Introduction to Cricket Farming. Now today we're going to talk about one of the most important topics, water. Out of all the topics, this is probably what I get the most questions about. How do you prevent your crickets from drowning? Well, now this is a great question, and today we're going to talk about the pros and cons of a few of the popular ways that people give water to crickets. Before we talk about the various ways to give water to crickets, first I want to emphasize the importance of giving clean water. I think the number one way that crickets die is through drinking bad water or contaminated water. It's highly important to change your water often, and it's probably preferable to give them filtered water. I put all my water through a Brita filter beforehand just to ensure that it's clean. There are horror stories of farms that have used city water, and when the city has changed the amount of chlorine content or the fluoride content in the water, the crickets have all died. So, use clean water, please. Now, anyone who's worked just a little bit with crickets realizes that they're horrible swimmers. If you have any standing water, they're inevitably going to drown in it. That's why giving water is so difficult to them. So, to avoid giving them standing water, a lot of people prefer to just give them something moist, something that they can get moisture out of without actually having to be in water. One popular solution is to use a sponge. So wet your sponge, squeeze it out a bit so that it's not dripping wet. You don't want it dripping wet so that puddles form below it. And put that at the bottom of your bin. One drawback to using sponges is that they dry out very quickly, especially when it's 80 to 90 degrees in your brooder. You can get around this by just moistening your sponge frequently, at least once a day. But I know many people don't like to do it that often, especially if you have a lot of crickets to deal with. You could be spending your whole day moistening sponges. Another drawback to working with sponges is that you need to make sure that your sponges don't contain any chemicals which will kill the crickets. Now, I've bought all sorts of sponges. Some have worked well, some have killed the crickets within a few hours. It's difficult to understand which sponges did work well though, because even the ones that were labeled all natural, dye-free, still killed crickets. Whereas some of just the bright yellow sponges that looked pure chemical filled that I got at Home Depot worked perfectly fine. I ultimately couldn't determine which sponges would work and which ones wouldn't, so I quit using sponges. Now, an alternative to sponges that's very popular is to use paper towels. Just like a sponge, you can moisten a paper towel and put it at the bottom of your bin. Again, make sure that it's dye-free so that the crickets don't die from the chemicals inside of it. But, like with the sponge, they'll dry out very quickly. So, a solution that a lot of people do, and you can do this with sponges as well, is if you take a chick water feeder, you can just put sponges around the bottom or paper towels around the bottom of it. And as the crickets stand on the paper towel and drink the water from the paper towel, they'll stay moist as the water goes down through the chick feeder. Now, I don't use paper towels largely because you need to use a lot of paper towels. And like a lot of people who farm crickets, I do so for the environmental benefit they have. The idea of having to use rolls and rolls and rolls of paper towels seems to cancel some of the environmental benefits of raising crickets. That's why I don't use paper towels. But if you're doing it just small scale, it works really well and it's really easy and cheap. Now, another option that I really like to do is just provide a little fruit or vegetables to the crickets. I have lots of apples in my yard, so a lot of times I'll cut up the apples into small chunks and I'll just throw a small chunk in with my young crickets. Now, there's enough moisture in there where they don't need to have any water and they can just nibble on an apple. Or a cucumber works very well. I like cucumbers too because they're very cheap and very easy to get. One side effect of this is that the food does go bad pretty quickly, especially when it's 80 to 90 degrees inside of your brooder. So after a day or two, you may notice that your fruit and vegetable is getting rather moldy. So you're going to have to go in and trade it out with something new. I really would only recommend this solution for really young crickets. By the time the crickets get to be older, they're going to eat through your apples way too quickly, and they're going to want to have some less sugary water. But for babies, it's worked very well for me, as long as you have the patience to swap out new fruit and vegetables every single day or so. I know some people think that going through all this hassle of getting sponges and paper towel is just not needed, and you just need to make sure that you administer really small amounts of water to the crickets. So that's why people like to use just a spray bottle and mist around the inside of their bins, or maybe mist a little bit on the bottom of their bin. Now, this works fairly well. There's two problems with it. One, if you're misting your bin to give water to crickets, the mist is really fine, which it needs to be so the crickets don't drown. And because it's really fine, it evaporates very quickly. If you want to get the right amount of water to your crickets, you'll probably have to mist multiple times a day. Now, you can set up a contraption which would automatically irrigate and mist your crickets a few times a day, but I find those a little bit risky in case something goes wrong and it gets the wrong part of your bin wet, or if it causes pools of water to form. And that's the big reason I don't do the misting technique, is because even though you're releasing very fine particles of water, they will join together and form puddles, and you will get babies to drown in it. Another popular option is to use water crystals. Water crystals very much have the consistency of Jell-O, and they work really well because the crickets won't drown in them. They can climb all over them. You can put some at the bottom of the bin with the crickets, and they'll stay moist for half a week or so, and no crickets will drown. I would not recommend buying any of the water crystals that are already pre-mixed with water, because you're really just paying too much money. Instead, you can get a bag of the water crystals that haven't been mixed with water for about $20–25 on Amazon. Here's a bag I got recently. And with this, you could make the equivalent to hundreds and hundreds of those jars, because it really doesn't take many water crystals at all to fill up a jar. So pretty much with these water crystals, if I take about a teaspoon of this and add it to a large yogurt container, this is going to be filled with a Jell-O-like consistency in about 2 hours. In fact, I did that about 2 hours ago. I don't know if you can see, but you get this nice sloppy Jell-O that crickets really love to eat. Now, while it works reasonably well, I do not use these myself. The big reason is I'm not sure what exactly is in them. For a little while I was using them, and my customers would ask me all about what the crickets would eat, and I would explain how they have an all-organic diet, and then they would ask me about how they would drink their water. And I really couldn't explain what this substance was that they were eating as a replacement to water. And the more I researched it, the more question marks came up. If you're just raising crickets to feed to your pets, it's absolutely fine to use these water crystals. I grow crickets for humans, and I just don't have enough confidence of what's in them. Perhaps some scientist could call me up and explain it to me, but until that happens, I don't feel comfortable using it. What supports my belief is, out of curiosity, I recently contacted one of the companies that makes one of these water crystals. And on the phone, I lied that I had just eaten some of these accidentally and wondering what I should do, if anything. I figured if my crickets can eat them, there should be no issues with me eating them. The company advised that I should go directly to my doctor and take with it the scientific information about the product that I just ate. That concerned me. If the company says you can't eat them and that you should go to the doctor if you do, I don't like the idea of giving it to my crickets. We just discussed the various pros and cons of alternative methods of giving water to crickets. But how do I give water to my crickets? I actually have two solutions, depending on the age of the crickets. For my babies, I don't want to give them standing water, as we talked about before, so I prefer to give them something moist. I have found moist coconut husk works very well. I use coconut husk because it's a relatively sustainable material. Now, you can get coconut husk in a variety of ways. You can get chunks of it, or you can get it already ground up. I've used both methods, but I prefer using the ground up coconut husk because it's a little bit easier to work with. So, because I don't like to change my water constantly, I take my water feeder that we've talked about before, and I fill coconut husk at the bottom of it. This gets nice and moist but there's no standing water on it. And crickets of all sizes can walk on this and be able to drink some water from it. And because I have it in one of these water feeders, baby crickets aren't going to drink all this water. I do need to change it about once a week though, because this coconut husk will get moldy. Additionally, before I change it, I need to make sure that there aren't a bunch of crickets burrowed inside of it. My strategy is just to sort of push down around the perimeter on this coconut husk, and that kind of agitates it enough where a lot of the crickets that are hiding in it will jump out of there and go to someplace else in your brooder. Now, I do this for about the first 2 or 3 weeks of a cricket's life, and then I switch from using coconut husk to giving them something with more standing water, because at that point they'll be big enough where they shouldn't drown. For this, again, I use my chick feeder, and then I just want to put something in it so that they can climb out and not drown. We talked about before that paper towels are an option that a lot of people use. I don't like using paper towels because it seems very wasteful. So instead, in this example, I just have a bunch of rocks. Rocks aren't going to dry out. You can use them as many times as you want. And if you put enough rocks in here, the crickets are easily going to find their way out of it. You just want to make sure that you clean and sanitize your rocks as well. Other things I've used are marbles or even scrap metal from my aluminum screening that we made our lids with. Those all work very well and provide a good way for the crickets to get in and out of the water without massive drownings. Those are just some of the ways that you can give water to your crickets. If you have any questions, please just leave a comment at the bottom of this page and I'll get back. Thanks for watching our video series.